At 183,000 ringgit, the Ford Ranger Platinum represents the flagship of the Ranger lineup, if you exclude the Raptor, of course. But the thing about the Ranger Platinum is that it seems to answer a question that a lot of people have been asking of late, which is, can you actually get a pickup truck that is truly as usable, as luxurious, as indulgent, and as refined as any passenger car out there? This might very well be it. And it bloody well should be for that price. My name is Aiman I. Abdullah. This is Malaysian Motoring. This is our review of the 2023 Ford Ranger Platinum. Now, the Ranger Platinum, as I said earlier, starts at 183,000 ringgit, which puts it about 14,000 ringgit above the Ford Ranger Wildtrak. Now, the Platinum is positioned as the more lifestyle and luxury choice within the lineup, which is why on the front you can already see a few embellishments in order to make this car look a little bit more refined, a little bit more classy, a little bit more elegant, or as elegant as a pickup truck can get. So up here you have very prominent Platinum badging all the way across the bonnet to ensure that anyone who sees you knows exactly what this is. If that doesn't work, you also have these chrome pins within the grille unique to the Ranger Platinum, which again sort of sets off this fascia, replete with silver bars all the way across, again to make it look a little bit more elegant, a little bit more classy. Now on either side you will find the full LED headlights replete with a C-clamp daytime running light signature, and these LED headlights are performance LED headlights from Ford, which means that in addition to them being very, very bright, they are also matrix LED units, which means they are able to dip parts of the beam in order to maintain high beam as much as possible without glaring other road users. There is also a silver bash plate down here, full LED fog lights replete with a little bit of chrome garnishing all the way around, which again I think is rather successful in making the Ranger Platinum look a little bit more upmarket compared to its other brethren within the lineup. Now down the side of the Ranger Platinum, again there are lots of embellishments to make this vehicle look a little bit more upmarket. The over fenders are now done in gloss black, which is standard in this colorway no matter which color you go for, including this lovely grey. You get the bi-turbo badging here with some satin chrome around it, which I think looks quite smart. You get platinum badging on the side. You get these standard side steps, which are very helpful given the fact that this truck is quite tall. And rolling stock is handled by a set of 20-inch diamond-cut alloy wheels wrapped in Goodyear Wrangler Territory highway terrain tyres. Now it is worth noting that by having highway terrain tyres, it does make the Ranger Platinum a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more refined on the motorway, although admittedly some degree of off-road usability is compromised in doing so. But let's be honest, most truck drivers very rarely go off-road anyway. Now at the back of the Ranger Platinum, you get full LED taillights, which I think look quite smart. You get the requisite Platinum badging here, the Ranger badging stamped into the tailgate, and a little bit more silver trim down here, which again, I think makes this truck look a little bit more upmarket. Now there are a few features on the Ranger Platinum which I think make it very practical and is in keeping with that slightly more upmarket positioning. For starters, this tailgate is now damped, which means that as it comes down, it no longer sort of slams its way open, which I think does make a very big difference. Now the other thing, which I'm pretty sure you'd have spotted by now, is this electric roller shutter. Now there is a button on the side, but that's all the way over there, so you can trigger it either from inside the car or on the key fob. So with a couple of clicks of this button, I can reveal the entire load bay. Now, admittedly, the roller shutter does take a little bit of space at the back, but honestly, I think this is still more space than most people are ever really going to use from their pickup trucks. And frankly, by having the roller shutter, the weatherproof roller shutter, over this cargo bay, it does make the truck a little bit more usable, because it means that you can actually put luggage and other stuff back here, things, you know, more dailyable rather than, you know, work items and such. Now, if you're using this truck for work, you will appreciate the fact there is a 12-volt socket as well as a household 3-pin plug back here, which is able to power tools and various other things should you be using this on a work site. There are also these clamp points down here should you need your truck to hold something in place while you saw it or something, whatever it is that truck people do. Now, the thing about the Ranger Platinum is that there are actually a few more features aside from that and the weatherproof cargo cover that make this truck a little bit more unique and in fact a little bit more usable as a truck. So firstly, this roof rack system is actually unique again to the Ranger Platinum. So when you're not using it, you can actually hide these roof rails down here, which I might add improves NVH. But when you do need some space up here for loads to carry or whatever, you can actually swing them out and put them in place like this. Now, as such, you can actually put up to 150 kilograms of a dynamic load up here with, I think, a static load of about 300 kilograms, which is quite impressive, and it does mean that you could use this potentially for camping. You could put a tent up here. And of course, if this is not enough space, you can actually extend the roof rack system by deploying this. Now, of course, you may be wondering, how does one benefit from an extra 10 inches of length? Well, it can be extended beyond 10 inches because by releasing this handle here, you can actually slide this rack all the way to the rear of the truck, or in fact, in any of the 4 set points along this rail system, and you can load even longer items. Things like surfboards, for example, would be very easily carried by a truck like this. See? Length does matter. Inside the Ranger Platinum, the niceties continue because all the materials in here have been upgraded ever so slightly to make this car feel a little bit more upmarket. You get this stitched dash leather top, which I think looks really nice and certainly feels very nice to the touch. You get more of that material here on the doors, which is nice and soft touch. You also get electrically adjustable seats on both sides, replete with memory functionality for the driver. You get this lovely sort of black wood trim all the way around the cabin, replete with ambient lighting, which can be adjusted however you'd like, although there is no color changes available. You get this lovely leather-wrapped steering wheel with contrast stitching, and going back to the seats themselves, not only are they quilted and perforated, you also get platinum badging very prominently on the seat backs, and they even come with heated and ventilated functionalities. Now, all of these things make the Ranger Platinum among the most comfortable Fords I've ever driven. That also includes the Ford Everest, because these seats are more adjustable than what you get in the Everest itself. Now, what is standard, however, is this lovely portrait infotainment system. This runs Ford's Sync infotainment system, which is among the easiest to use out there. It's displayed very beautifully, the graphics are fantastic, and it comes replete with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And because of the way the screen is set up, being very, very high-res and very, very responsive, it means that you have the majority of your screen handling your Android Auto, while on the bottom you still have sort of fixed buttons to handle your HVAC controls, as well as some shortcut buttons for frequently used functions. Now, talking about the HVAC controls, they're not just in the screen, because you do have some physical buttons down here, which I appreciate hugely because it means that I do have the option to adjust my temperature via knobs and switches should I want to. There are also lots of knobs and switches here on the steering wheel, which again is very tactile and very easy to use. All your buttons here control things like your adaptive cruise control, your lane keep assist, your voice command system, as well as your volume, your track controls, as well as things like answering and putting down phone calls. On the right, you have buttons that are dedicated to the use of manipulating this screen up front, which is again very high res, great graphics, very responsive, and you can customize this in various ways in order to get exactly the display that you want. On top of that, adding again to the premium factor in this car is the fact that in addition to the Raptor models, this Ranger Platinum also comes with a Bang & Olufsen audio system, which I think is the very best that you can find in a pickup truck, full stop. It is enveloping, it's powerful, it's very crisp. This is exactly what audiophiles would want, which means now, if you're like me and you're really into your music, you can actually buy a pickup truck without having to worry about the audio system. Now, in terms of practicality, space is very well catered for. You have a couple of cup holders here. You have a little French fry holder here, which I'm instead using to hold my access cards. You have USB-A and USB-C ports here, a wireless phone charger, a relatively large center bin replete with a 12-volt socket. You have very large door bins here, and you have a couple of deployable cup holders at the very corners of the dash. You also have an upper and lower glove box to contain even more stuff. And again, overall, it does seem very easy to be able to live with one of these things. Now, in terms of the controls, which I have to touch on before I get into the rear, you have the electronic gear selector here, which does this very funky thing of moving from drive to park should you shut the car off in drive. You have your drive mode selector here, which cycles you through things like eco, comfort, mud and sand, mud and rut, and rock crawl and all of that nonsense, because this is still a very capable off-roading machine. You also have more terrain response systems here. You have your electronic parking brake, and most notably, you have a button here for semi-autonomous parking, which I think would be very useful for a lot of people who haven't maybe driven a truck before. Now, with this seat set up in my driving position, space back here is very generous. I have a good amount of footroom, a good amount of knee room, and a decent amount of headroom as well. And of course, even if this seat was set further back, thanks to the scalloping on the back of the rear seats, it does mean that there is a good amount of knee room regardless. Now, one of the things that I'd like to point out about the Ranger in general is that it is incredibly comfortable for rear seat passengers. This recline angle is relatively comfortable. You have very long seat bases, which means you have very good under thigh support. And because the front seats are mounted quite high, you can always tuck your feet in underneath the seat in front of you. On top of that, you have a couple of aircon vents here, a USB-C and USB-A port, but if you need it, there is also another household socket back here, which means that you'll be able to plug in a charger for a laptop, for example, to be able to do work on the go in your Ford Ranger. There is also a deployable center armrest here with a couple of cup holders, although the mechanism to deploy them is a little bit sticky. You also get ISOFIX mounts back here, which should not be too difficult to locate given the fact there are just slits in the seat which reveal the mounting point at the rear. Now, if you're putting a bulky rear-facing child seat, you will note that these doors do not open that wide, although that is generally a gripe of all pickup trucks and it's not unique to just the Ranger. But in this Ranger Platinum, again, you have the quilting that continues on these seats, although they are not heated or ventilated. And of course, you still have very good material quality all the way over here, like this contrast stitching here and more soft touch material here, and overall it does feel rather nice. Now, for those curious, I'm just going to mention this for the sake of it. If you're wondering where the door handles are, they're actually in here in this little pull. So you just sort of pull it inwards like that, and that deploys the doors. Now, it is worth noting that as standard, the Ranger Platinum does not come with tinting on the rear windows, which means if you do have children back here, you may want to apply additional tint here and, of course, on the rear windscreen. But the thing about the Ranger Platinum, to me, what stands out most of all is not actually what it's like to live with in the interior and stuff like that. Because, of course, while all of these appointments are very nice, the biggest difference is actually in the way it drives. Now, while the Ranger Platinum has a lot of unique embellishments, what isn't unique is the powertrain. So up front, there is a 2-liter bi-turbo diesel producing about 210 PS and 500 Newton meters of torque, with that torque band between 1700 or 1750 RPM and 2000 RPM, with power going to all 4 wheels via a selectable all-wheel drive system, as well as a 10-speed automatic gearbox. Now, that 10-speed auto is worth noting because with the very narrow torque band, it is very important that the gearbox is competent enough to ensure that the truck remains within that torque band as much as possible. And I have to say that the 10-speed auto in this does a pretty good job of that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is a drive mode selector, which means you can choose between things like eco, normal, tow, haul, slippery, mud ruts, and sand. Of course, I've been driving this car around predominantly in eco. Now, on top of that, you obviously have an all-wheel drive selector, which means you can choose between 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low, 2 high being the rear wheels and 4 low and 4 high being all 4 wheels. This does mean that you don't have to unnecessarily power extra wheels when you don't need it. And on top of that, there is an automatic mode, which means that the truck will be able to figure out where it needs to send that power when you're in all-wheel drive. Now, among the many things about the Ranger Platinum that I appreciate are, again, some of those unique embellishments. So sat here, I'm far more comfortable in this than I would be in any other Ranger, or in fact, even the Ford Everest, because these seats have a little bit more adjustment to them than the rest of the Ford lineup. On top of that, the choice to equip the Ranger Platinum with highway terrain tires as opposed to all-terrain tires means that it is a little bit more comfortable, it's a little bit quieter, and on top of that, I'm going to even go as far as to say that grip has been improved ever so slightly as well. All-terrain tires are not exactly known for providing particularly good on-road grip, whereas these are pretty good. On top of that, in the rain, I've noticed that this truck does not slip nearly as much as other trucks that I've driven in the past. All very positive things, no doubt. Now, having driven the Ford Everest, which uses the same powertrain, I can say that the Refinement remains broadly the same. The engine feels like it's very, very far away. And because that torque arrives relatively quickly and in a relatively narrow band, it does mean that you don't really have to rev this engine out that much in order to get maximum performance. As a result, the engine never gets loud enough that it really becomes intrusive into the cabin and therefore becomes wearisome, particularly over a long drive. On top of that, the controls in this truck feel far more car-like than you might initially expect. Compared to vehicles like the Toyota Hilux or the Isuzu D-Max or Mazda BT50, all the controls in here feel very much like a car. The steering in this car is electrically power assisted, and it feels a lot more natural to use compared to other trucks out there. And then when you pair that to the fact that you have these comfortable seats and the nice appointments, it just makes this a very pleasant place to be. On top of that, the Ranger Platinum comes absolutely chock full of driver assistance features, which means you get things like traffic jam assist, autonomous emergency braking, radar guided cruise control, lane keep assist, which works by steering the truck as opposed to braking the wheels on either side, which is what the Toyota Hilux does, which feels very strange. You have blind spot monitoring, a fantastic 360-degree camera, all-round parking sensors, and it just becomes a very well-equipped machine. Now, going back to the way this truck drives. Now, in town, you're not going to run away from the fact that this is a truck, which means it is very large, although the fact that it is quite blocky means that it's very easy for you to be able to see all the way around and therefore be able to navigate tighter spaces. It's quite easy to place this truck on the road. Additionally, thanks to the enormous wing mirrors, it means that you have fantastic view over your shoulder, and it does minimize the blind spot to some extent, although of course there is blind spot monitoring in this truck, which means that's largely moot. When you're driving in town, you will notice that the ride in this truck is surprisingly pliant. The primary and secondary ride is truly class leading. It manages to get over bumps without too much fuss, and it settles down very quickly as well, which is very noteworthy for a truck at all. Most trucks are not really able to do that. They bounce around, they feel rather stiff, and they overall just feel really uncouth. But the Ranger, especially the Ranger Platinum, does not suffer from this at all. And then when you're out in the motorway, things get even better because this engine is nice and brawny. So when you're trying to maintain motorway speeds, the engine does sort of quieten down and sit at about 1600, 1700 RPM. And when you do need to overtake, the gearbox is relatively quick to respond. And if you do want to manipulate the gears yourself, there are actually buttons on the side of the gear lever, which are honestly largely pointless because this gearbox is smart enough to be able to put you in the right ratio when you need it. On top of that, the NVH levels in this truck are relatively low as well. As I mentioned earlier, the highway terrain tires certainly contribute to that. This is a markedly quieter truck compared to the Ranger Raptor. And despite having those big wing mirrors and this relatively bluff design, wind noise is very, very well suppressed. While other vehicles, like say the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro, for example, use double laminated glass, in Ford they just use really thick single pane glass, which means the amount of noise intrusion that comes into the windows is really, really minimized. This is a truly luxurious place to be, and that is certainly something I never thought I'd say about a pickup truck. In fact, having driven the Mercedes-Benz X-Class abroad, I can say that the Ford Ranger, Platinum or otherwise, is actually on par, if not slightly better in some regards, than the Mercedes truck, which has since been discontinued. I wonder why. So to me, if you're looking for a truck that's meant to be able to do work day in, day out, covering everything, being able to drive you on the road and off the road in equal amounts of comfort and plushness, then the Ranger Platinum is essentially peerless. Because if we were to look at competitors like the Mazda BT50, another truck that I rated quite highly, the BT50 doesn't quite have the same level of refinement or quite the same polish and execution as the Ranger Platinum. And if you were to compare this to vehicles like the Isuzu D-Max, which shares a lot of its parts with the BT50, obviously the interior does not feel nearly as nice as this. Of course, it is also about 30 to 40 grand cheaper. But as far as I'm concerned, if you're willing to spend 183,000 ringgit on a truck, then this is a pretty good way to spend it. Because especially if you're getting into a truck for the first time, never having owned a truck in the past, or if suddenly truck life is a thing that you need to adapt to, then this is a truck that's very easy for you to get used to because it doesn't feel too far off driving a very large SUV. This is a truck that I would recommend very, very highly because in addition to that fantastic powertrain, you have all of these wonderful interior features that make this a lot more livable. Things like these ventilated seats, which are very powerful, I might add, the fantastic graphics, the great technology, and the very comprehensive suite of active driver assist features means that this is a truck that you can use both for work as well as for play. You can put your family in this, you can travel longer distances, and you're not going to have too much issue at all. Now, before I leave you, I do want to touch a little bit on fuel economy. So this 2-litre bi-turbo engine is known for being relatively frugal. And again, thanks to the lower rolling resistance of those highway terrain tires, it does mean that this Ranger has been able to average about 8.7 to 8.9 litres per 100 kilometers in the time that we've had with it. Now, bear in mind, we haven't been driving this truck in eco mode. We have been driving it through traffic jams and all sorts of flotsam, which means that for the most part, this should be a relatively accurate representation of what you can expect to get from your Ranger Platinum. So overall, this is certainly a truck that I would very, very easily recommend over any other truck out there, even the Raptors. This is the easiest truck to live with that I've ever driven by far. And I certainly hope to see that with the arrival of the Ranger Platinum, we should see more of its competitors move or try to move into the luxury space, because I believe that this is an area that does need some degree of addressing for people who need the practicality and versatility of a truck, but might not necessarily be really down to blues things in the way of refinement and so on. Again, this truck is peerless. I love it a lot. I might consider getting one even, because we do kind of need a crew car. But anyway, that's been our review of the 2023 Ford Ranger Platinum. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also follow our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.